Hello, football fans. This is the Scuffed Football Podcast. We're here to cover the conference championship round of the NFL playoffs. This is Noah. I'm Ted. We're going to cover last week, get into this week. Probably going to be a pretty short one because we only really got 6 games to talk about. Again, I think we're just going to move in chronological order. Let's start with that Jags-Chiefs game. I feel like the first place I personally need to start is walking back some stuff I said about Trevor Lawrence earlier this year. Look, I still don't know that the dude is ever going to be a generational talent, right? But I did say that this man was cheeks. Like, he wasn't that good in college. He's not that good now. What I will say is, while he was not good enough to win this game, he was the only Jag trying to win the game. There was a play, actually, like, late in the fourth quarter. I was like, fuck, I'm going to need to talk about this one on the podcast, aren't I? They're inside the red zone, trying to catch up, drops his shoulder, tries to fight his way for a first down. Like, he threw himself through the defense to get them into the red zone. The very next play is he throws it out to the flat to his running back, who fumbles the ball without contact and gives the game away. Look, Trevor Lawrence was trying to give it done. I watched him give everything he had. Like, all props to the Jags, because I think this game specifically cemented that they got something to work with moving forward. I was really impressed with Trevor Lawrence's efforts, and congrats to him, man. Good year.
I mean, yeah, agreed. I think that overall it's a really good year. We didn't expect them to be in the playoffs. Again, making this big, leap forward from where they were, from last to first, and then actually winning at least one playoff game. I think that's like really good momentum. I think they have hopes going into the season, like the next coming season. Again, he's not, as good as Patrick Mahomes. He's not as good as, Burrow, but he's definitely still there. And like seeing him kind of succeed this year, it was nice to see. And I'm happy for him, And the Jags did well this year.
Yeah, they did. You can't take away anything from their year. Like, even making the playoffs based on what you saw last season would have been a stretch. Like, so congrats to him. And again, like, it's really nice to see Trevor Lawrence be put in a position to succeed. He didn't throw an interception. He didn't fumble the ball. He didn't make bad plays down the stretch. He absolutely kept them in that game. So, like, all the credit in the world to him for genuinely being the only Jag trying. I do want to talk about the Chiefs, but I kind of want to circle back to them because I think their matchup here is more significant than what they did this past week. The only real thing that I want to mention now is to talk about Patrick Mahomes' injury. You were telling me before we started recording that there were some people who said they'd rather have Mahomes on a busted leg than Josh Allen, which I cannot agree with. However, I think it is really interesting to see what the Chiefs are going to be able to do playing this upcoming week if Patrick Mahomes doesn't have himself at full health.
Well, I mean, knowing the injury, seeing it, watching it, I don't think I don't even know if there is a chance he could get to 100%. So I think we are going to see a very limited kind of offense. I think that will change part of, the Chiefs' offensive playbook. I think they're going to have to do their best to protect Mahomes. I don't expect him to be at 100%. But we've seen him in general, and maybe at 80%, he's still good enough to beat the Bengals, but definitely will probably not be at 100%.
I just think it's significant for Mahomes specifically. Like, a lot of the times that you watch his highlight reel, he's doing like inhuman things, right? Like, if he needs to plant his foot down and throw the ball 80 yards, I don't know that he's got that in him on a busted leg, right? There was one play in specific where he threw it out to the flat for a screen pass, tried to throw across his body, which is usually like a hallmark. Patrick Mahomes can throw it from any body position anywhere on the field. Like, we saw it in the Super Bowl last year that he was horizontal with the ground and still managed to get the ball out, right? Like, I mean, I feel like not having a stable base to work from, not being able to plant one of your legs is firmly, like, I feel like that puts those kind of plays at risk. And like you said about their playbook, so many of those plays aren't written that way. They're just kind of, they break down. Travis Kelce is a literal grizzly bear on the field, so you're always going to be able to find him. And you can just and Patrick Mahomes is mobile enough to keep the play alive. I think that, like, if there's any coach in the league that I trust to design an offense around a broken quarterback, it's probably Andy Reid, especially when it's that broken quarterback. But I guess I'll just be super interested to see how it affects like what kind of plays they're calling, or even if he ends up taking more sacks this week just because like he can't be as mobile. I really think that was pretty significant, and we didn't watch him play badly necessarily, but busted up Patrick Mahomes is still not Josh Allen, and I'm going to defend that one.
I
agree. Moving on, would be the Eagles and the Giants next. Look, I don't want to come across as just a blind Eagles fan, okay? I really don't. But the Eagles kind of did all of the things that you expected the Eagles to be able to do. Their offense worked. Their defense worked. Everybody on the field was doing their jobs. The notable parts of that for me for the Eagles were even when play calling was really bad, it still worked. There was a point in time in the game, there was a 14-play sequence on offense. 13 of them were run plays, and they all worked. Like the ball kept moving forward. I think there was only one run in that 13-run stretch that didn't go for positive yards. Like, which is pretty incredible to call 13 runs in a row and gain yards every single time.
Not have the defense stop,
right. But beyond that, they won the fight in the trenches. Hurts looked good. I think it was noticeable that his shoulder was still not 100%, but he was willing to run the ball. He still made really good throws. Like, he was on target. I think this is the game that you could expect from the Eagles after watching them play throughout the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not 100% Jalen Hurts, but he was still good enough to, keep it rolling and everything. And, I honestly expected the Giants to kind of keep it a little bit closer. I didn't expect this kind of blowout. The Eagles are looking scary after their bye week.
The one positive for me, this one is going to come out as a fan, and I don't think I can avoid it, right? We talked a couple times earlier this season that it's hard to contain a mobile quarterback. Like, no matter how good your defense is, a quarterback who's able to run makes it really, really, really tough to design or execute a defense. But one of the big things that's always hurt the Eagles when they play the Giants in recent years is the fact that Daniel Jones can't just pick up the ball and run. And even without a whole lot of blitzing, like, I still thought the Eagles did a pretty good job at containing Daniel Jones and not letting him scramble for a whole lot of yards. I was pretty impressed by it. I know Daniel Jones isn't the threshold of, mobile quarterbacks, but he still has beaten teams this year and the Eagles previously, like, with his legs. So I thought that was pretty notable. I do agree with you, though, that I definitely thought the Giants were going to keep this a whole lot closer. I won't even say that their defense was that bad past the first quarter. The first quarter was pretty rough, but beyond that, like, it was just the Eagles. Like, they couldn't stop the Eagles from getting first downs. They kept the yardage pretty small for the most part. Like, they did their jobs and chunked it down. You can't be mad if you let up 4 yards on a play, but enough of them together still turns into a first down. Like,
yeah, exactly.
So the next game we've got, I'm sorry in advance, Noah, but we do have to talk about it. The Bengals and the Bills. So many of us, myself included, expected this to be one hell of a football game. Just whoever won, whatever side you believed in, it was going to be a banger of a football game. I was super excited that in the pregame we saw snow on the field, but not too much snow to play in. I was like, oh, this is going to make it that much better. And unfortunately, the game just kind of fell flat.
Yeah. I remember I was actually a little excited. I saw the snow. I was like, ooh, maybe, Burrow isn't as used to snow, so maybe this will help throw him off. It did quite the opposite, it looks like. Came out firing away, and the Bengals looked pretty unstoppable. Again, against we're not the best defense, but we have a really decent defense. Again, losing Poyer at one point kind of hurts, but still, I expected this to be a fight. Again, our offense never really got rolling, and it just wasn't the game I thought it was going to be.
I will say that the Bengals seemed prepared, in a way that, I don't want to say that the Bills seemed unprepared, but the Bengals seemed to have an answer when something got stopped. They had another answer on offense. When something let up a lot of yards on defense, that felt like they had solutions to it moving forward. Like, I think they just made really good adjustments, so I want to give credit to the coaching staff. But watching this game, the impression I got was largely that the Bills looked out of sync and kind of beat themselves. I didn't think this game was super out of reach, at least in terms of like, if you watched any individual series or 2-3 series back to back, like, yes, the Bengals always had more points on the board, but it never felt like the Bengals were significantly outplaying the Bills. It just kind of the Bills just couldn't execute.
Yeah, for the most part, it was always like a one-score game. At most, it was 10, but like by the field goal. So, I mean, yeah, I agree. It definitely didn't feel like it was that far of a game. And even we were texting throughout, up until like 6 minutes left in the fourth, I thought maybe we could still have a chance if, we played like hurry up. And obviously it never happened. But yeah, it was quite unfortunate.
Yeah, that drive specifically with like I think it was about 6 minutes to go, and I was like, you're like, I've already chalked it up. I'm drinking in sadness now. I was like, no, this is still winnable. I mean, we watched Josh Allen do that in the past. He's come back against Kansas City multiple times in his career to like really make a game of it. Even if he doesn't win them, like they've gone to overtime or been the last drive. Like, what was it 2 years ago in that banger of a game that like.
Yeah, it was last year. Yeah,
3 touchdowns on the sake of like a minute and a half in the fourth quarter. Like, absolutely, it's not that it was out of reach for the Bills. It just they felt like I don't know if it was missing open targets or misrun routes or like just it felt like the ball never found the receivers even when the play was good enough to get it there. I will say that Josh Allen didn't have his best game, but I still think that like he's enough of a high quality player that like they're gonna be back here. They're gonna do it again. They're gonna get there. But I guess the reason that I wanted to bring up the Chiefs again is sort of to talk about like now that we know that we're going to see the Bengals and the Chiefs. I'm just wondering what kind of quality game we're going to get. The Chiefs, like I said, they won the game, but you kind of worry about Mahomes' health. They didn't have the best game ever. The Bengals, while they took care of business, they also didn't blow the Bills out of the water when the Bills were underperforming. I wonder if maybe we're looking at the AFC differently now in terms of like their ability to win a Super Bowl against the Eagles or the Niners that maybe we had overestimated before.
Right. And I think both teams, obviously the Bengals and the Chiefs, have the talent to both go to the Super Bowl. I think, honestly, this is going to come down to, like, who's healthiest, who has the most available, star power there. Again, it depends on how limited we're going to see Mahomes. But I think that even, like, a limited Mahomes can put up a fight. But I don't really know,
Yeah, I guess I'm just interested. Like, I expected the Chiefs to kind of handle business. I expected the Bills and the Bengals to kind of struggle. And then you'd expect out of the AFC Championship that the two best teams, or at the very least, 2 of the best 3 teams would be able to put on a show and show that the AFC was the stronger conference here. But just like as we've gotten to these conference championships now, that like I'm not convinced that we've seen the best version of the teams that are there in the AFC. And I guess I kind of like have a seed of doubt now. My mom has been asking. My mom is the world's biggest homer. There's nothing but the Eagles. Everyone's bad except the Eagles. Even like if the Eagles went 0-17, she'd still believe in us, right? Like, regardless, like I've been getting the question all year long about how well can the Eagles compete against the AFC. Do you think they can beat the Chiefs? Do you think they can beat the Bills? Do you think they can beat the Bengals? And most of the season, I've been like, no, probably not. Like, we're good, but they seem better. And I guess after watching this past week, like now I can kind of like go in with a little bit of confidence that like maybe the Eagles are better. Like, I mean, I think it's at least closer than I thought it was throughout most of the season, just based on what I saw this past week.
Yeah, I agree. So I would have said, coming in, like, yeah, I agree with you. Like the top 3 would be the Eagles on any given day. But yeah, right now I'm like thinking even the Niners could beat all 3 of them, and I think the Eagles are better than the Niners. So yeah, I could definitely see that. I definitely see an NFC Championship now.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not totally sold that the NFC is better than the AFC. I think like this week is going to make a lot of that final decision for me, but I do think that it's closer now than I expected it to be going into the Super Bowl week. That does bring us to our last game, though. The Cowboys and the Niners. First off, this game was marketed to be the Sunday night game of the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. I'm just like, of all of the fans nationwide, like this was the marquee game. I think the NFL executives were probably stroking themselves to the thought of the money that was going to come in from Sunday night Cowboys and 49ers. This game felt pretty one-sided, but the score stayed kind of close. The Niners obviously did come away with a win, but I mean, the Cowboys stayed within 7, and they did have the ball at the end of the game. I guess, what did you see from this game that maybe you were mentioning before we started that maybe you're a little further down on the Niners than you were going into this week? So what did you see that's knocking them down a peg?
I mean, again, I think that if the Niners were as good as like we've been raving about, I don't think they would have struggled as much as they did. Again, I expected the Niners to, I expected both teams to put up like a high volume. I expected this to be really high scoring. I mean, seeing the offense that they were moving, but like there weren't a lot of points put up. And I mean, even, again, the Cowboys still remained pretty close. It's just, I feel like my confidence in the Niners right now, like this is the first time we've seen them struggle though. So I'm not like just losing hope entirely, like I think they have the ability to beat any team any given day, but I'm a little nervous going into this now.
It's weird for me, right? Because I expected the 49ers to be like really good on offense and defense. Maybe they're not the best in either category, like individually, but like they're significantly above average in both categories. And I guess like watching the Cowboys struggle so much, I can chalk that up to the Niners being good enough on defense. But the Cowboys defense wasn't very good at all. So to see the 49ers not feel like they had a completely, dominant offense is just kind of unexpected. I did mention it really briefly before, but I felt like the 49ers were in control of this whole game. Like I never really felt like, oh, the 49ers are about to lose, or there's a chance that they're going to. Like you felt pretty confident that they were the better team all game. But I guess the scoreboard just doesn't reflect that. And I guess that leaves another shadow of a doubt, a window that like, hey, maybe another team can capitalize despite how good we thought the 49ers were. Moving into this upcoming week, it gives us the opportunity to keep talking about the Niners and bring the Eagles back into the conversation. I think that if the Eagles are as good as we've seen all season long, that this is going to be their hardest challenge in winning another Super Bowl. And I say that because I've mentioned it on the podcast before that the way that you win championships is a very good defensive line, a front four, and being able to drop 7 back into coverage in the pass game. And the 49ers absolutely have that. I know that the Eagles' offensive line is good, but I don't think they've played any team all season long that is as good rushing with just 4 as the Niners are. So I think that matchup is scary. The other part is that the Eagles have had weeks where their defense wasn't very great. But I think that if they happen to have one of those weeks this week, I think the 49ers just have too many very versatile weapons that's going to make it difficult for the Eagles to stay in the game if the Niners score a ton. That being said, like after watching this week, I do think that the Eagles on paper are a better team than the Niners, but I think the matchup here makes this one really, really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm still, I think that I agree. I think this is the first true strength test for the Eagles right here in the NFC Conference Championship game. They're going to get their first strength test. But I think I actually think on paper, the more complete team would be the Niners. Again, we saw them struggle last week, but I think if you were talking about all those factors, right? You take all, you line them up in comparison. I think the Niners have like the better talent, the more talent, I guess, on the roster. So I have more trust in them still, even though seeing them struggle this week, it wasn't, ideal. But again, I think this will be a great game. I think the Eagles will definitely keep it close. I think they have the ability to win, but I agree. I think that the Niners have too many weapons if the Niners get rolling early.
I just think I mentioned before we got into last week's game that I guess the unknown of Brock Purdy more than anything else was going to be significant in that game against the Cowboys. And to some extent, I'll say that I was right in that he did face a challenge more than he's seen all season long. He did have to be creative. He did have to make tough plays. They were never so far ahead that Brock Purdy just got to be a system quarterback. He did have to flourish. But I don't think that he looked special enough to rely on it going into a challenge like the Eagles, or if they make it to the Super Bowl, the Bengals and the Chiefs. I mean, doing it 3 times would be something out of a Disney movie, right? I think the Niners are going to struggle. I think the Eagles are a better team than the Cowboys, and I think the struggles that we saw the 49ers have are going to be even more difficult this upcoming week. I guess my questions about the Eagles were less how good are they, like some of the other teams that are left. My question about the Eagles was health. Their offensive line is healthy. They looked really, really, really good. The Jalen Hurts' shoulder, you were worried about it. It's his throwing shoulder, but he made all the plays. He wasn't afraid to run the ball. Their whole playbook was still at their disposal. And I think I think I have to pick them to be the favorites to win this game against the Niners.
I think you're also a little biased.
Look, I'm the first one to tell you I'm a little biased. I know it, but and part of it too is that I'm also using recency, right? Because had this game come up in week 16 or 17, I may have picked the Niners because I think at the time the Niners were playing better, right? But the Eagles bye week and their health helped a lot. The 49ers struggled against a team who I don't believe to be as good as the Eagles. I think there was a challenge there that would need to get addressed significantly for the 49ers to be winners in this game. I'm not saying it's out of reach for them, but I can feel pretty confident going into this week that the Eagles should win the football game. That being said, the spread is in the Eagles' favor at 2.5. I'm telling you, I'm going to be the first to tell you that I would be far too nervous to gamble on this game. But I think I would take the Niners plus 2.5 because I expect this game to be close. I still think the Eagles win outright, but I think with 2.5 points to add, I think you got to take the Niners.
Yeah, I'm taking Niners as well, but I'm picking the Niners to win outright as well.
Which is fair. I genuinely, before I am a Philadelphia fan, I am a sports fan, and if this is a good football game, I'm not going to feel that bad about the Eagles losing to a really good team like the Niners. We'll see how it goes. I just want it to be good football. Before anything else, let it be good football.
Yeah.
It brings us this brings us back to the Bengals and the Chiefs. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think it's time we crack down and actually pick a winner. Weirdly enough, the Chiefs are at home and they're the underdog. They are a +1. The Bengals are actually the favorites on the road.
Yeah, that's a little weird, I'd say.
It is strange because we've just blindly trusted the Chiefs to be one of the best football teams for 5 years now, and they've made it to this game the past 5 years in a row. They've won a Super Bowl. They've been back to the Super Bowl a second time. I guess that part of the reason for this has to be Patrick Mahomes' health. It's hard to believe that they are as dominant if their biggest, most dominant piece is not fully healthy. And I guess it's just strange. I don't see the Bengals being significantly better than the Chiefs that would allow the Bengals to be favorites on the road. Even I could maybe justify, but favorites on the road is a stretch.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I don't know. I've always, anytime I've counted Patrick Mahomes out, he comes back and proves me wrong. Gosh, I have no idea. And it's only one. I have no idea, man. I have no idea.
For me, I think that the Bengals are playing with a chip on their shoulder. They made it to the Super Bowl last year as the AFC champions. I among many counted them out to be able to repeat that this upcoming year. There was the issue with the potential neutral site AFC game they ended up selling tickets to that now have to be refunded to 50,000 people. And Joe Burrow made a comment about start issuing those 50,000 refunds. So I think they've got a chip on their shoulder. I think that I can trust in their health more. Like this, I think I would struggle a whole lot more with this if Mahomes was fully healthy. Because I do genuinely believe that these teams are super evenly matched. But I think I'm going to take the Bengals. Just the little bits and pieces, I think, give them the edge for me. And 1 point is not a huge enough difference that it's going to sway my decision.
Yeah, I got to go with the healthier team, which is the Bengals right now. Again, I think I would pick the Chiefs if Mahomes was 100%. I would not count Mahomes out entirely in general. But yeah, I think the Bengals are just the healthier team, and they're on a better group. So
absolutely. So I do have, like, to wrap this podcast up, I do have two more sets of questions, two more things to talk about. The first, I guess, is less about picking who we expect to win and more what would we like to see? Like, what's our ideal Super Bowl matchup, and what is the Super Bowl matchup we least would like to see?
Okay.
So for me, I think the most exciting Super Bowl that we would possibly get would be 49ers and Bengals. That's really hard to let come out of my mouth. But I think is in terms of like it let's take my team out of it for a second and say that the Eagles weren't my team, right? Like I think that just like the excitement quality of football is better from the Niners than it is from the Eagles. The Eagles have won a lot of games. They've played really good football, but they're genuinely not that flashy, not that exciting. Like they've had their moments, but as a consistent basis, the flash isn't there. And the 49ers just have the star power, the jersey sales, the whole, like, they've got what you want on the football team. I also think that, like, when you add the Bengals in rather than the Chiefs, I think you add storylines that make it dramatic, right? That Burrow had his shot last year and they ended up losing the game. That, like, all of the drama they went through and you know, even something down to, like, T. Higgins' mental health after the collision with Damar Hamlin. Like, there's just so much more on the line for them, so many more emotions, like, and I know the Chiefs are good enough that, like, we're going to see him in this championship game again. Like, Mahomes is going to make it to another Super Bowl if that's the worst career path his career takes him to. Like, I think there's just so much more intrigue and emotion behind it with the Bengals that I think that's the most exciting one for me.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. I think the most exciting one would be the Niners Bengals. I think you get the flashiness in the Niners, and then you get, like, you know, kind of like they've worked their way up from the bottom. Now they're here kind of vibe from the Bengals. You know, they're like, they work. And, you know, like the Chiefs, I just don't think if they had Tyreek Hill, I think they would be the flashy team, like above the Bengals. But I don't think they have that, like, you know, deep threat as much. So I don't think it makes them as flashy. So I definitely agree. Niners, Bengals would be probably the matchup I'd want.
For me, in terms of the one that I would least want, I know that naturally it just becomes, Eagles, Chiefs. But no, I would be more interested in that one, right? The one I would least like to see is the Chiefs and the 49ers. I think that the Chiefs have a lot of interesting pieces to their offense. I think they've got a lot of flair and they're a lot of fun. But I think that for me, the 49ers' biggest talents are the ability to take away that offensive game. And I don't think that their offense necessarily would allow the same kind of flash against the Chiefs that it would against the Bengals. I think they just play two very different styles of defense that you'd lose the best parts of both of those teams. I think that Super Bowl, I would expect it to be a pretty good game, but I don't know that I would expect the same level of wow factor the entire way from start to finish that I would from any of the other three matchups.
Right. I don't know. I don't know. I think I would probably agree. Again, I feel like even if it was just Chiefs and Eagles, I think I would be some excitement. But yeah, I agree. I think the Niners' strength is their defense, their ability to kind of make teams, you know, struggle. And we haven't seen the Chiefs like have like a decent run game in a very long time. So like, I don't think the Chiefs have like any means of really like having big plays. So yeah, I definitely don't think that would be the most ideal, like, exciting game.
I will just say really quick that the reason that it's not Eagles Chiefs, because I mean it's pretty close in all honesty, is just that Andy Reid coaches the Chiefs, and I'd love to see the Eagles beat the Fat Boy, man. I would live for that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about before we get out of here is just some follow up from a couple of weeks ago. At the end of our regular season, we started talking about awards and who we would pick. This week, the NFL announced some finalists. I just kind of want to basically go through those lists, see how close we were, and see if we can maybe narrow down predictions now that there are established finalists. So the place I want to start is Coach of the Year. The finalists are Brian Daboll from the Giants, Sean McDermott from the Bills, Doug Peterson from the Jags, Kyle Shanahan from the 49ers, and Nick Sirianni from the Eagles. I'm going to be honest with you. I really didn't expect to see Sirianni on that list of finalists. Kind of cool, but for me, I think if I remember correctly, I didn't necessarily retain this or write things down because why would I do that? I still expect that Daboll would be my favorite. I believe that's what I said a couple of weeks ago, but for me, like looking at this list again, Daboll would be it for me. And I think the reason for that is just the biggest difference from what you expected out of the Giants and where we saw them.
I mean, if you're using that criteria, I actually really think that it would be Doug Peterson. Again, like we didn't expect the Jags to be here. And, whereas they made it to the same, they made it to the divisional round as the Giants did. But like, we saw the Giants not really put up a fight. And then we saw like the Jags, like almost, come in close. So I think if anything, like, I think my choice would be Doug Peterson. Like, again, I definitely did not expect the Jags to be in the playoffs in general. And going from fourth to first, I think is pretty significant. Despite, seeing the improvement from the Giants, I think the Jags is more impressive.
On the flip side of the coin, I know we brought it up a couple of weeks ago that like picking coach of the year is difficult because like we're not sure if the criteria is best against expectations versus just coached the best, right? And I think if that's the case, like I think in either category, Sean McDermott is probably last for me. Again, great coach. Like if it weren't Sirianni on the Eagles, I'd love to have McDermott. Don't get me wrong. Like I think he's very deserving of that nomination, but I guess just we expected the Bills to do well, and they're still there. They didn't have the great seasons, or at least as great a season as Shanahan or Sirianni did. Like, if it does come down to just best record, like best team, whatever, then I wholly expect Shanahan to be the leader in that clubhouse because that dude's a mastermind.
Yeah.
On to comeback player of the year. I think we just kind of briefly glanced over this one. I think this is the one that I forgot to put on my notes, so we came back to it. The finalists for this one are Saquon Barkley from the Giants, Christian McCaffrey of the Niners, and Geno Smith of the Seahawks. For me personally, I'd love to see it go to Geno Smith. I think that dude just had a special year. He threw for 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Like that's a great season from a dude who'd been counted out like most of his career. Like I think that's a really special season, and I hope it goes to Geno. But I think for me personally, any one of those three guys would be deserving.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I think my top pick would probably be Saquon. Again, props to Geno for getting them to the playoffs when no one expected that. But I think seeing the bounce back from Saquon and seeing the actual effect he has on the Giants, being able to be part of that core that leads them to the playoff berth, I think it's pretty big for him. So I'm happy to see him back, and I think that'd be my pick.
Like I said, any one of those three would be deserving for me. I guess like in my head, the difference there for me is that like Geno Smith came back from against odds. Saquon and McCaffrey we knew to be good, and they're coming back from health related issues. Like I think that's the difference that makes Geno special for me. But again, if any one of these three guys wins it, like good for them, man. They've earned it. They've all had really good years. Next brings up Rookie of the Year. So we're going to start with the offense just because I think it's the most interesting. Kenneth Walker, the Seahawks running back, Garrett Wilson, the Jets wide receiver, and Brock Purdy, the 49ers quarterback, is on that list. Yeah, really strange one for me. I think I think my issue with this one is that Purdy played, 3 games in the regular season? It's hard for me to call a dude who plays 3 games when the finalists get announced, to be Rookie of the Year. That being said, he may end up with the best year out of all of them if they potentially make it to a Super Bowl or win it, right? I'm not trying to take anything away from Purdy. I think he played well while he's been in there, but to call him Rookie of the Year feels kind of disrespectful to Walker or Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, what week was it that he took over? Week 16?
I want to say he played 3 games in the regular season. So yeah, I think he took over in 16. Maybe he played the tail end of 15 when Garoppolo got hurt.
I mean, the only thing I will say about that is if those 4 games, he was that impressive that I agree. I don't think it's fair to put Purdy on that list. Again, he might win it, but again, if he wasn't what if Jimmy Garoppolo never got hurt, right? He would still be leading the Niners right now. Never heard of Brock Purdy still. Yeah. That's the difference between the finalists there. So I definitely think it's a little bit of disrespect on, Kenneth Walker. And I do, again, they were great this season, all year. And then we wouldn't have even known Brock Purdy if it wasn't for injury.
Yeah, it's just so strange. It's so small a sample size to be able to say that he was the best offensive rookie. I think for me, Garrett Wilson's probably my guy. I think he was the guy that was most of note as an offensive rookie for me this year. I think Kenneth Walker had a good season, but the Seahawks running room was just so variable. There were so many guys in and out. I know they suffered through a lot of injuries in that room. I know Walker had a good year, but I think Garrett Wilson was just super consistent. I think he made the Jets better than we expected them to be, and I think he's the most deserving. The big one for me though is just Purdy's on this list. It blows my mind still. We'll move to AP Defensive Rookie of the Year. The nominees are Sauce Gardner from the Jets, Aiden Hutchinson of the Lions, and Tariq Woolen from the Seahawks. When we went over this the first time, I don't know that I considered Aiden Hutchinson. I'm pretty sure I was just really quick to it's Sauce Gardner and I moved on with my day. Yeah. I still think it's Sauce Gardner, but I think the 3 names on that list make to see them as finalists. Maybe I'm reconsidering a little bit to be maybe it's a little closer than I think. I still think Sauce Gardner's the guy, but maybe it's a little closer than I was ready to give it credit for.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sauce Gardner is probably for it. But I think that all of them have kind of shown that they're, they did belong in that conversation. So, Gardner might win it, but again, the other 2 should feel very proud of their seasons and they have a lot of momentum going forward to be in that conversation. So,
absolutely. So the next one that's interesting to me is Offensive Player of the Year. At least for the past decade or so, this award has typically gone to a non-quarterback player, an offensive contributor who isn't necessarily up for the MVP. But a lot of these names overlap. So Jalen Hurts, Eagles quarterback, Justin Jefferson, the Vikings receiver, and Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs quarterback, are not only nominated for this award, but also the MVP. The other Offensive Player of the Year candidate is Tyreek Hill. I want to believe that Tyreek Hill being the only non-MVP candidate on this list, logically, that counts him out. But I think in terms of this award specifically, where it doesn't go to a quarterback, it doesn't go to the MVP, they tend to be different. I would feel like Tyreek Hill would be closer to the top of this list than you'd expect. But I think if you're going to go that route, that non-quarterback, not the MVP, then it's Justin Jefferson. He's miles ahead as the best receiver, just by a lot this season. I know we were talking a few weeks before the regular season ended that he had the shot to go for 2,000 yards in a season. He ended up not making it because of a couple bad weeks at the end from Kirk Cousins, but he's still the 6th highest single season receiving total ever. He's 6th all time. Crazy. The only reason I'm going to lean away from Hurts and Mahomes for this award, and at least in terms of the finalists, are this tends to not go to a quarterback.
Yeah, agreed. I think that they'll probably, for the sake of moving that list, right? So you take away Hurts and Mahomes, like I think you do have like Jefferson and then Hill. And so you're right, like it is a lot closer, but I think the distance between Hill and Jefferson this season was pretty drastic. So I got a little concerned when you started, singing praises about Tyreek Hill for a second. I thought you were going to say he deserved it over Jefferson, and I was
no. If you're picking a receiver for this, or like a receiver running back, right? Like, I mean, it's got to be Jefferson, right? I think my only contest to that would be like if Jalen Hurts doesn't win the MVP, I think he becomes a more realistic choice for Offensive Player of the Year. And the only reason I say that and don't mention Mahomes is just that Jalen Hurts is an offensive weapon in that not only is he throwing the ball well, he's running the ball well. He led quarterbacks in terms of carries, yards, and touchdowns for a quarterback inside the red zone this season. Like he provides a lot on offense, but I think that if you're going to give Hurts the MVP, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, that it kind of discounts him from the Offensive Player of the Year award. Like I think basically this is going to come down to how the voters believe things go and the MVP vote, whether it's Hurts or Jefferson. But I wholly expect Jefferson to be the winner of this one.
Yeah.
Defensive Player of the Year. I know we didn't really have a lot of candidates. We talked about how difficult it was to narrow things down because their jobs are so different. But the finalists are Nick Bosa, 49ers defensive end, Chris Jones, the Chiefs defensive tackle, and Micah Parsons, the Cowboys linebacker. First off, I'm happy for Chris Jones to have made this list. Like I thought he had a good season, and not only has a lot of the league discounted him, we discounted him by not talking about it. But for me, honestly, I know this is supposed to be an award about the regular season, but I really haven't been watching the defensive candidates that thoroughly through most of the season. Watching just throughout the playoffs, though, I mean, I think Nick Bosa has clearly set himself apart.
I think in general, like Nick Bosa just is in a different conversation. I think like prime JJ Watt and like Nick Bosa are like almost the same level. So yeah, I think he stood out, but he always stands out. So I mean, like I wouldn't always just be quick to just be like Nick Bosa, but I think this season he's had an even better season than I anticipated. So like I definitely agree. I think it should be Nick Bosa, but I do like the other candidates. I think it's probably going to go to the Niners because the Niners defense is more stout. But yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. The 49ers just being that much better on defense than the Chiefs or the Cowboys, like you kind of have to lean Nick Bosa there.
Yeah.
That brings us to the big one, the MVP. 99% of the time this goes to a quarterback. So I first want to give Justin Jefferson credit for being on this list. Like I knew he had a really good year, but I didn't know that he was going to get an MVP nomination. Like that's pretty cool. Great for him. He's probably finishing 5th in the voting, which I'm sorry about because he's had a phenomenal year, but I'm just going to be realistic. The other candidates are pretty much as expected from what we saw this season. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes. I'm still sticking to my guns that I think it's Jalen Hurts. I don't know that he's the best quarterback on that list, but I do think that a lot of the MVP votes go to best player on the best team. You could then make the argument, Mahomes was the first seed in the AFC, but I think the Eagles were considered the better team for longer throughout this season. And I think Mahomes is kind of detracted by the fact that he's so special every year. Like this wasn't necessarily a super standout, oh man, Mahomes is extra good this year. Like it's just Mahomes being Mahomes. If you were just to pick the best player every year, Mahomes would win every year. I think that like I have to lean Hurts just based on the math and how this award typically plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I think typically how it plays out is it will be Jalen Hurts. I mean, looking at their numbers though, like again, we talked about how like Patrick Mahomes is just Patrick Mahomes, right? Like Mahomes threw for 5,200 like plus yards for like 41 TDs. And, I know he's not as mobile. Like Jalen Hurts had like 20 rushing touchdowns as well. Like it was, he had a great season as well. But the difference was like he only threw for 37,000 yards and only 22 TDs. Like, but I think it will go to him still. I think he did lead like the best offense. But that's just like Mahomes had like a a slower year than we anticipated, and he still threw for 5,200 yards.
I think my big question, right, like as far as like how the MVP voters vote, I know we'll never get a solid answer to this question, right? Like just as a hypothetical, like we watched the Eagles struggle for 2 weeks, really, really tough when Hurts was out. Do you believe, or if you were a voter, let me pitch it that way. If you were a voter, does that help Hurts' case because they were worse without him? Or does it hurt his case because he missed 2 games where a guy like Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, they played more games and contributed to their team in the same fashion?
I think if anything, that actually probably helps them. Like, the whole point of the MVP is the most valuable player, right? To like their team. We discussed this before when I at first previously said it should technically still actually be Tua.
Yep.
And so like I think it does help his case. Obviously, like we saw the Eagles not like flutter or like flounder, but they struggled somewhat. So I definitely think it helps his case. But again, going back to that criteria, I don't think it's any of these. I think it might be Justin Jefferson. I think he should. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's weird because like I have to acknowledge that like Justin Jefferson, right? Like a quarterback can do it on their own, right? Which I think is a lot of the reason that the MVP 99% of the time goes to a quarterback, right? Like Justin Jefferson can't do it by himself. He still requires somebody to throw in the ball, right? Like I think if you were like as deserving as Justin Jefferson is being of wearing a crown that says best player this season, because I think that's accurate, right? Like that crown has to come with a little like somebody has to scratch with a knife on the back, like also courtesy of Kirk Cousins for throwing in the ball, right? Like, and I think that just kind of like stacks the deck against a receiver because as good as Jefferson was, and I know that he was the best player in the league this year, like I also recognize that like part of that comes down to having a quarterback that can get it to the best player in the league. Like as far as the like it being a quarterback goes, like then it. You can weigh it down to who had the best contribution. And I think that helps that whole, hey, Hurts missed 2 games and they kind of struggled for 2 weeks. Like, I think that kind of like, if you're going to use that argument, like you're putting it in Hurts' hands, like, and like I said, if you were going to pick the best player in football, like and then you're giving it to a quarterback who can do it all himself, like you're just putting that award in Mahomes' hands until he retires. Like, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation. I'll never be a voter. I will never get into the heads of one of the voters. Like I'm never going to know the answer to my question, but I do just think it's an interesting way to pitch it. But yeah, so that wraps us up for awards, covers our game coverage. I think that's probably going to wrap us up for this week. We'll see you guys after the end of the conference championship and do a whole big Super Bowl preview. How about it? All right. All right, guys. Well, that wraps us up. We'll see you next week.